Hello. Hello, and welcome back to this episode of Five Alarm Task Force. I'm your host, Steve Green. Once again, I'm happy to be with you and happy to have you with us. And my guest today is a firefighter paramedic, Jim Burneka Jr., correct? There's a junior
Yes.
in there, right? I want to make sure I have
Yes.
that. Jim has been a firefighter paramedic with the Dayton, Ohio Fire Department since 2001. He currently resides as the Health and Safety Coordinator for Dayton Firefighters Local 136. Jim has been involved in the fight against occupational cancer for over 15 years, and we're going to be discussing that time period. He has presented on cancer prevention throughout the U.S. and Canada. Jim's training has been certified through the IFC TCP program. Jim hosts a weekly firefighter health and wellness podcast called The 25 Live and a monthly webcast podcast called APS Radio on fireengineering.com. He is also a technical committee member of NFPA 1585 Contamination Control. Jim, it's great to welcome you to the show. Thank you for joining us.
No, thank you, Steve. I'm glad to be here.
Well, we have a lot in common. We both have a strong interest in the Firefighter Cancer Initiative. It's important to us. We both know of people who have been stricken with cancer. We both know people who brothers and sisters we've lost to cancer. And while most of us went into this job with eyes open that this job can be, whether you, again, we call it a job, but whether you're career, volunteer, part pay, WUI, doesn't make any difference. We go in with that knowing that, yeah, it could be dangerous at some point. There could be risks that we don't even know about that we could meet. But we never thought, most of us back in the day, and my day is a lot longer than yours, that just the stuff that was burning was going to be something that would kill us.
Not at all.
Exactly. So let's start with your career in Dayton. And strangely enough, now you were the number 2 big, great lower South Central Ohio firefighter that I was in your neighborhood many years ago, you and Chief Goldfeder. I didn't realize I was living in Hamilton Township and going to grad school in Cincinnati.
He's got a much better mustache than me.
Well,
I'm working on it. I'm coming for you, Billy.
Okay, there you go.
Not really.
I'm too light. I'm too gray now to compete anymore. My wife says, well, why don't you put a little, I said, I don't think so. I'll just go natural for me. If I was going to do something, I would have done it up here years ago, but it wasn't worth it. So what got you interested in the fire service initially?
I had one of my dad's high school buddies and softball buddies played, they were on a softball team together.
Yeah.
And just kind of hearing stories from him, I ended up doing a ride along, just being a teenager with Dayton Fire Department, and I just fell in love right then and there. As soon as I really got in the firehouse and just saw how they did things, I knew it wasn't your typical Monday through Friday sit at a desk. I mean, it was every day was an adventure, and it was also fun. I mean, the guys itself, it was a dynamic I could see myself in really easily, even back then.
Yeah, that's great. Was this before or after 9/11?
Oh, this was before.
Yeah, but you joined.
I joined January 29th of 2001 is when so was my intro into the Dayton Fire Department rookie school.
Right. Great community. Matter of fact, we were out there in December of 2018. Our older daughter got her master's degree from Oxford College.
Nice.
And so she studied remotely from Boston where she was working, and she did that. And we flew out there and flew into Cincinnati Airport, which is not, as you and I both know, was not actually in the state of Ohio. It's in Kentucky, just over the bridge in Kentucky. And we drove the GPS gave us this crazy route. It was like going on a roller coaster. All those little state roads, country roads there to get all the way up towards Dayton to Oxford. But we loved the year that we lived in Cincinnati when I was going to grad school. It was just a great community, great city. They had just finished redoing the downtown, so they had all those walkways between buildings so that you didn't have to worry about getting out in the rain. You could park your car in a garage and never get wet because you could walk between all the buildings, movie theaters, restaurants with those walkways. It was a great community. And I actually looked into, there was a small volunteer department around the corner from our apartment complex, which had been hit by 2 tornadoes 2 years apart. When we first moved in there, the landlord told us that. And they said, well, when can you serve? And I said, well, I'm home almost every night anyway. He says, oh, we got enough night people. Could you respond during the day? I said, no, I'm a student at UC grad school. He goes, okay, maybe another time. So that was the first time I did it purposely to look for it. Then I wound up a year later, we moved to North Carolina, and I didn't go looking for it, and it found me. So that's what started me back in 77. So as you first got in, well, you'd already been hearing stories from the guys, and you did your ride along and stuff like that. How did you feel as you got in professionally now, and you were seeing this involvement? And of course, all of your shift and your whole department went through the tragedy of 9/11 as a unit, and you were still a rookie at that time.
Yeah, I mean, I was still a punk kid, 21 years old when that happened, and looking back, just thinking about it, you felt for all those guys, gals there, and you just really wondered, would I even have the balls to do something like that? Go up in there, and you just felt as a firefighter, but just as as a citizen of this country, just pain, and just from that day, the number. Everybody knows 343,
right?
Everybody in the fire service knows, but in reality, that number is so much more. With all the occupational cancer deaths that they've had since then, it's a tremendous number now.
Yeah.
And I mean, it all stemmed from that one incident,
right?
And it just has gone on and is still going on, decades later now.
Yeah, here we are.
So, and I had no idea, of course, of that was going to be it. I mean, I thought 343, but no, you realize just how impactful it was years and years and years later.
Yeah. I guess one of the good thing, the silver lining, was how the country came together and honored firefighters around the country, not just our brothers and sisters at FDNY, but they honored firefighters around the country. But unfortunately, we're also we easily slide on that pole from heroes to zeros as firefighters.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
Steve, I don't know if you've ever made it down to, the memorial over there.
New York. Yeah, I've been there. Yeah.
Okay. I went there with my wife, and it's been about probably 6 or 7 years ago now. And just seeing that was a lot. But then I don't know if you went in the museum there.
No, we didn't go in the museum that day, right? It was long line. It was boiling hot outside. We were there in the sun.
So I went in there, and this is how I've described it. And I think it kind of paints a picture of just how I feel. And I'm sure other people feel this way too. I am thankful. I'm glad that I went and did that tour. But I never want to do it again.
Yeah.
I didn't realize the wounds I had, that I had just, buried deep inside of me. And then when you go through that tour, they all come out, and it is, it just hurts. I mean, you reopen those wounds, and again, like I'm glad I saw it, because it just, to see everything, how they present it was just, was great. I just don't want to ever put myself through that again. It's too much.
Yeah, we went in the summer of 2019. Our younger daughter was living. She had been living in the city for 11 years already, and I lost it just coming by 10 station. I hadn't even stepped over into the memorial yet, and I saw 10 station, and I lost it there.
Yeah.
Yeah. It has been tough. So you come out of that. I think we all came out stronger, whether we were still active or retired disabled like me. But I think the fire service came out more dedicated and stronger. And, you made a great point when you said, but I have the guts to do that. And I think it was one of the clips of the video that CBS did in their compilation initially afterwards, and then it's been available since. But it shows, I think it's a captain and his crew. They're late arrivals, on there, and they look up, and the captain says, "Listen, boys, if any of you don't feel you can go up there, it's okay. I will never hold it against you. This is going to be a tough one. So if you want to step back, now's the time." Not a man stepped back. And not one of them came back. But they went up.
Yeah.
They went up. I don't know if I could have done it. I've done, in my 8 years of active duty, I've done a lot of crap stuff. I mean, tough stuff that I never really expected in the fire service. But I did it. And then since then, I've always carried, since I got disabled in 85, I've always carried a full BLS bag in my vehicle. My family estimates I've stopped well over 200 times at emergencies where nobody else was there yet. And I've seen some more pretty crappy stuff. And I throw even with my back condition and multiply operated bad knees, I still throw myself in, let the adrenaline do its work, and then I pay for it when the adrenaline stops running. But I'm not the kind of person who can just drive by or walk by and not help somebody in need. I think, like you would say, it's in our DNA now. It's who we are. And yet, with all that tough stuff that I've done, I don't know if I would have been tough enough to climb those stairs. But every one of our brothers did and was. And that's what we have to remember. So, any other big things happening as you were coming through your career that made you who you are today?
Those early years, it was a different department as far as size-wise goes, and also just attitude-wise. We were not a big city, not a little city, but we burned a lot. We had a lot of incidents, and we had a lot of fire apparatus. When we were talking between engines and trucks, 19.
Wow.
That were staffed, 4-man staffing. And Dayton hit some pretty hard times, and they cut one apparatus after apparatus after apparatus after apparatus, and to where today we got 11 fire apparatus. So, wow. Yeah. So, and of course, over the last 20 something years, we've gotten busier. So, that whole doing more with less and just being resilient, we've had to deal with that. And those old guys, I'm considered an old guy now, one of the old guys there.
So I must be ancient.
And, having seen how the department was at one point in time, and truly the pride we had, and just the resources, and we were good, we were blessed, and it's just definitely been more difficult and more dangerous, over the years. And so when you have a new kid that comes in, this is all they know, and it really takes us trying to sit down and explain to them how things were on a fire scene, on any emergency scene, but also just also in the firehouse too. Again, that whole suck it up, buttercup, and just deal with it, and just the gear with a badge of honor. The dirtier you were, the more you did it. All that kind of bad stuff, for the most part, has dissipated, but it's taken 20 years to get to this point. I had, I'm also our peer support coordinator, and I actually was called out to the rookie class a few weeks ago to talk to one of the probationary firefighters that's going through recruit school right now. That probably wouldn't have happened even 3 or 4 years ago. So, I mean, it's really, the tide has changed, but I think it's, unfortunately, we've had to deal with some losses along the ways that kind of opened us up and said, all right, well, what we're doing isn't working. We have to do things differently. We have to be open and actually be vulnerable, which the fire service is not good, and the
Right.
firefighters are not good at being vulnerable and open and honest. Um, there's too much machismo
Oh yeah.
to cut through a lot of times, and that is slowly um, eroded over the years.
Yeah. Yeah, oh, definitely. I went through it myself in my first apartment in North Carolina. We had a real bad call. Old Chevy pickup truck with a gas cap behind the driver's side. I don't know if you remember those, but turned over. Gas cap came off, turned over on the driver's side. Gas came off. Fuel leaked out, ignited the vehicle. It was right up the street from the chief's house, and we were dispatched about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I was only a half mile from the station, so I made a lot of those calls. So I jumped in, and my guy who's still my best friend today, who I met the night we were voted in at that little department in 1977, and he was hanging around a lot. So we were the two on the calls, and there was no officer, just the caretaker who gets the first piece out. And he said, Steve, get up in the right seat. We're going, because the chief is screaming, get me an engine company now. I got an entrapment with fire. Get me an engine company. And he was right up the street, and one of our other firefighters lived across the street, and he was bringing his extinguishers. But it took us every drop of our 500 gallons, because the chief didn't even give us the time to lay into the hydrant. He said, just come in, and if anybody else shows up, we'll backlay it. And so it took us all 500, every drop of that 500 gallons to get it out. When we first got there, he was screaming still. We got it. We got the fire out just as the EMS arrived. They were the only ones who had, the EMS supervisor was the one who had the Hearst tools in those days in our county. And we got him out, got him transported, survived for 3 days. We packed up, went back to the station, cleaned up the truck, cleaned up the hose. I went into the locker room, started puking my guts out, that stink, that smell, what I had seen, what I had to do. It just hit me really hard. So cleaned myself up, washed my face a little bit. I'm still wearing my bunker pants. And I come out, and the caretaker who had driven the engine saw me. He says, are you okay? And I said, yeah, I guess. He says, was it the call? I said, yeah. He goes, suck it up. So by luck, by fate, by providence, Rich was on the call with me, and we're still best friends today. And he's going to be coming down from Central Florida next week for a quick visit. And it's probably, when we're together, not on the phone, we talk at least once a week on the phone, but when we're together, that's one of the calls we always have to talk about, because we have to talk it out. We both went through it, and we can't do that anymore, because we know, just this weekend, we lost a firefighter to his own hand again. Just yesterday, Chief Billy's close calls email came out. And while everyone hurts, every loss that we suffer hurts, when we suffer, when it happens at our own hand. And if we don't ask ourselves in that department and around this country, what could we have done to maybe prevent that? And we can't just, we're not psychiatrists. What the hell do we know? We can't do anything about it. That's so wrong.
A lot of times too, Steve, I think we're not very proactive in the fire service when it comes to that.
Right.
Unfortunately, we're reactive. So you almost have to wait for something to happen, for a firefighter to die of cancer or suicide, before the department goes, oh, let's do something about it. You've already lost that member. They're gone. And that's when you decide to do something about it. It's more responsible, and it takes care of our members more if we're, before anything even happens, if we start, enabling initiatives and making our health a priority and trying to catch this stuff before it happens. But that's just, unfortunately, it's not a priority a lot of times, and most of the time it really comes down to the almighty dollar.
Yeah, very true. Very true. Hey, while I think of it, let's give a shout out to our mutual friend, Nantucket Deputy Chief Sean Mitchell, who ran the Boston Marathon yesterday, raised a good amount of money for the Last Call Foundation. And I was happy to make a donation to that for him. I give him a lot of credit for doing that. That's a tough run. I grew up in the Boston area. I used to watch that race from several locations. And it was so great to see it run again. And be back again after 2 years without it. But to know that Sean was one of those races there out there doing it is really rewarding and proud. We're proud of him, that's for sure. And
Absolutely.
Everything else, not just for running, but everything he's done for this topic that we're talking about.
He's done so much, and he's done it all with a new job, new baby, and he just keeps going on and on. I mean, there's not much more of him left to give, because he's just gone on and on and on and continues to do that. So, yeah. I'm probably going to call him later on and see how it was.
Yeah, him and Jason, of course, and Diane and Paul. I mean, these are the wonderful people who took me into the family and made me a part, which I'll be forever grateful for. And it's funny, off here we were talking about my oncologist, and the fact was that when I had my first scare in 2016, he didn't know anything about the Firefighter Cancer Initiative. He had never asked patients if they had been firefighters or anything like that. Nobody had ever come to him to say it. So I got him interested. And between then and 2018, when I went back, he had done a lot of work on it, a lot of study on it. And he's involved with Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Centers and our research team down there. And Dr. Cabal Martinez, and they, he hosted the symposium a couple of months ago here in Miami. And they've been on the show several times, and it's great to have people like the team at and the other teams across this country who are saying, you know what? Yes, we know cancer is in our society, but here is the group of the heroes who risk their lives every day for us. Why? We need to help them focus on them to see what we can do to help them. And thankfully, they found out so much already, and there's more to find out. It's ever evolving, as we know. 2016, we had no idea what PFAS was, or PFOA was. We thought about the stuff that was burning and how to do gross decon and things like that. Never did we know or even think that the gear we wore to protect us could be killing us. And we had our eyes rudely opened to that just a few years ago. Again, thanks to Diane, thanks to Dr. Peasley, thanks to Robert Berlott. I mean, Sean and Jason and many others, the Firefighter Cancer Support Network, all the Firefighter Cancer Support organizations, whatever their initials are, the initials aren't important. It's the job that they're doing to help our firefighters around the country. And that's what's important. And so that brings us to this point. How did you get into this so early, back 15 years ago?
So it all starts with, at that time, a 5-year-old boy named Gavin. So Gavin Lucas. I worked with his dad, Sean, and still work with his dad, Sean. I worked with him the other day. He made me cook He wouldn't cook for the guy, so I had to cook and drive. I had
He made me cook. I like
they cook. So yeah, and he was on overtime too, so he had no reason not to do it. But anyway, no, he's a good friend of mine. But his son Gavin, when he was 5, was diagnosed with Ewing sarcoma, which is a really rare bone cancer, especially rare in kids of that's that young. And I happened to be the union special event guy at that time, which was basically the party guy, events and fundraisers and all that kind of stuff. So I ended up putting on a couple different fundraisers, trying to raise money for Gavin and the family, and also raise awareness. And it was kind of a good problem. We raised too much money. So the question was, well, where do we give this money? Because Sean ultimately said, excuse me, I've got insurance. Like, we're good. We don't need money. Thank you, but no. And so we had this big pot of money, and where do you send it to? So one of the places we ended up sending it to was the Firefighter Cancer Support Network, which was, I just ended up finding on Google, just kind of, back then, and I'm talking 2006, I believe. And we're firefighters and cancer, and hey, it makes sense. So we ended up getting a hold of the president and founder, Mike DeBron, and he actually came to Dayton and accepted a check live in person. And that was my first time meeting him, and really first time knowing that firefighter and cancer was an actual thing. Before then, I just thought that they were there in case a firefighter did get cancer to help them out. I didn't know that we were more prevalent of getting it until I ended up meeting him, and he shared his story. And I ended up staying in touch with him. He was an LA County firefighter, and I just so happened to be working at that time, being young and single and having a good job where I had money to do silly things. I was trying to see all 30 major league ballparks. So I had to go to the West Coast. I had to see the Dodgers and the Padres and the Angels and all that stuff. So him living out there, I ended up staying in touch. And when I flew out there, I hung out some more with him and spent some time and just learned more about him and the organization. And again, this is 2006, so they just started. So California had a state, or had a they had a coordinator there. New York, I believe, just started one. And before you know it, I got suckered into starting the Ohio chapter of the Firefighter Cancer Support Network. So that's sometime in 2006, probably summertime is when I ended up doing that. 2006, 2007, something like that.
Was Mike flying then when you were out there?
He was.
He was on the chopper already. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. My best friend that I told you about is a chopper pilot. He flew Trauma Hawk down here for Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, and now he's up in north of Central Florida, still flying for them after 25 years.
I got to go up in the air with him a couple times in one of those Black Hawks, which was just an amazing thing to see. Not the typical person gets to do that.
Right.
So it's pretty fortunate with that. But I ended up saying, okay, yeah, fine, I'll be your Ohio guy. And I think I asked him, what do I do? And he said, do whatever you want. Because there wasn't a playbook back then.
Right.
We were just learning about, studies that were coming out that actually showed this. I think the Grace LeMaster study from University of Cincinnati had come out. So it was really at that point my responsibility just to try to spread the word and let people know that occupational cancer is actually a thing, that by doing our job, we have an increased risk of being diagnosed. And, there's things that we can do to try to reduce that risk. And it was very, just going around my state and talking about this, and very quickly I was able to get the blessing of the state union and state fire chiefs, which helped get the word out as well. But there still wasn't a whole lot of talking points because we didn't know a lot back then. There wasn't a ton of research. There certainly wasn't a lot of preventative measures that had been established. It wasn't until probably much later on when we started doing, like when we sat down and wrote the white paper in 2013, that we kind of had a game plan of what we can try to do to reduce our exposures and therefore reduce our risk. But it was just really just kind of getting the word out and letting people aware of it. Back then, that was the main purpose, and it slowly grew from there to where, we talk much more about prevention stuff now. They're still amazing about support. No, they're just, I mean, if somebody gets diagnosed, including, when I was diagnosed, and I know we'll get to that later on, but they have a great support system that even I used years and years and years later.
Yeah, we had Keith Tyson as a guest early on, who was from Miami-Dade and created the Florida chapter, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think I was number 3.
Yeah.
And he was number 4.
Yeah, I think so. Right.
I beat him by a couple months, I believe.
Yeah. And again, a real nice guy, had a great career with Miami-Dade. And then a few months into retirement, boom, it fell. And you mentioned something about, the union there in Dayton and around the state. And we'd be remiss if we didn't give a shout out to the new general president of the IAFF, because if you heard him at his EWG speech or you heard him at the webinar, he is 10,000% in on keeping our firefighters safe and healthy. And that's his number one priority. And to hear, being from the Boston area and to hear Ed Kelly talk that way. And I still talk about and care for my Boston Jakes. It's not a word that a lot of other firefighters even know what it means sometimes, but that's who they are. And I'm just thrilled to see him in that seat, because he is dedicated, and he's already shown that with some shakeups and changes and additions. The new technology and medical team that he's put together, I think, is going to be wonderful. It's going to be a great help to members. And as I said to him when we were talking just before the webinar began, we were off the air, and he said something like about, well, a volunteer, why are you so big on the IAFF? Because I said, well, I'm big on unions. I think unions are what's good for this country. They created this country. They built this country. My dad was a union member when he worked for a supermarket chain. When I worked for the chain, I had to join the union. The only problem I had with them is when I went to pick up my first check, I was 16 years old. My good friend had his check, and I said, how come I don't get a check? He goes, let me look it up on the sheet. And he says, oh, it says you're down here as deceased. I said, no, I'm here live. Well, I'm in front of you right now. So could you give me my first check for $80-something or something like that? But when you're 16, that $80 meant a lot of money, But I just feel that the IAFF, under his leadership, is going to make a new turn, a broad turn in the road, and that are keeping our men and women healthy and happy to the best of ability. We're not always going to be happy with everything our departments do and stuff like that. But, the union, I've always been the union support of the IAFF, even though I always wore my 8 years, I was a volley. And I just think we do the same job. We all do the same job. And that's what it's about. We put on our pants the same way, one leg at a time. We just do the same job. Some of us just work in a community that can't afford to pay every single firefighter. And so they still need protection. So we protect them, and that's what it's about. And I've been able to go around this country and visit fire stations whenever I've traveled. And I showed them the badge, and then they never asked me if you're a volunteer, your career, or you have your union card. They just said, come on in. You want to buy into the meal today, or whatever. And even got to run a couple of calls with FDNY when I was in the city one time at a conference. And I think that's really who we are. We are a family. I think that's the most important thing. And it doesn't matter what grouping you're in. We are a family because we make a choice, and it's a calling. Yeah, we know that there are some people, as of maybe the last decade or so, who weren't sure what they were going to do in life, so they decided, I think I'll try being a firefighter. And for some it worked, and for some they went someplace else. It just didn't work. And that's okay, because that happens with lots of jobs. But to be in and to stay in and to take an interest and continue to learn and continue to share it takes a calling to do. And sometimes we get it from different ways. You got it from, as a kid, being exposed to it in a positive way. I got it when I was 7 years old, when we had a little fire in the woods behind our home in suburban Boston, and the pumper came out, and everybody else ran to the woods to watch him put out this little fire. I stayed by the pumper. The first thing the driver did was give me a lollipop. The engineer gave me a lollipop. And he said, you see that dial? That's this. This is, I'm controlling the hose with this. Watch this, watch that. And I was fascinated, but I didn't want to be a firefighter. I had no plans. I was just fascinated and admired them. And I made my parents take me around our community to visit every firehouse. Then when I could ride my bike, I'd go surrounding communities. And when I had my car, I visited all the greater Boston, as many firehouses as I could. Just never intended to be a firefighter until I walked into a situation where I had the opportunity. I was invited. So with that said, our chief in North Carolina at the time was one of the leading experts in flammable liquids fires. And because of that, we had a whole crap load of 5-gallon pails of AFFF. We also were first due at the tank farm right across the street from the airport for any fires at the tank farm. And he got several of the companies there to install what then we thought were the best subsurface applicators. And we would pump in the AFFF and let it float to the top. And couple of small fires, it worked and it was okay. And we did lots of practice at the airport fire pit with that. I was lucky enough that in those 3.5 years that I was there, it never touched me or my gear. So I was lucky in those days, so I didn't have any direct exposure to it. But I think one of the biggest things that we really may not have taken into consideration as the generation passed from mine to the one even before yours, that shows you how old I am, is that what was burning changed. When I went into a structure fire, of, let's say a residential structure, basically it was wood burning, real wood, and fabric burning. And that's what was burning. But as I got hurt in '85 and started coming out, we started seeing things change. We started seeing not real wood. We had make-believe wood coming in. And we had plastics coming in for upholstery and stuff like that. Then we start seeing our times change. How do we go from an incipient stage to an active stage in less than 3 or 4 minutes? We used to have, 7, 8, 10 minutes to get to a scene and could, capture it in an incipient stage. And I think we probably, maybe we knew, some of us knew in the back of our minds that that stuff was going to be different. And I think we first did that with how can we put it out? How do we put it out? Can we put it out just with water, or do we need to start using something else? But I think we lost sight of, early on, the chemical side of it. Because wood had ash. Yeah, and that, like you said, the machismo of what our gear looked like, the dirty helmet and the dirty gear. And that was a good worker. Yeah, we got that one down. Yeah, we didn't realize all the crap we had all over our necks, our faces, outside the mask ring and stuff like that. We would take off go off air as soon as we wanted to do overhaul, even though there was steam and smoke still sputtering all around us, because we were hot and sweaty from fighting the fire. So I think there was that time of, I'd call, innocence, that we didn't know enough chemically about the changes. We just started seeing some changes in what we were firing, or where a quick hit with an inch and a half, well, again, I'll age myself, a quick hit with 1.5 inches instead of 1.75 inches wouldn't, knock it down, and that you'd be okay. Now it takes a lot more than that oftentimes to do that. And thanks to people like Mike Duvron and Keith and Cindy L with her organization, and they all started educating me. And I'm only a few years in. You've got 15 years of knowledge that you've shared with us, and talking with you, I feel like a newcomer. I feel like the probie in the firehouse, but I think that we're both on the same wavelength, that we know what a danger this is to the fire service, and all we want to do is give as much protection and support, because we can only protect so far. We can never 100% prevent. And if we don't look at it with that realistic view, then we're trying to swim upstream with one leg and one hand. But if we say, okay, we can do a lot to help prevention. We can teach about decon, and now we're teaching more about with extractors and washing our gear and stuff like that. But we'll never, right now, at least I don't believe in, definitely not in my lifetime, but I don't think we're ever going to get to the 100% level where we can say, oh, firefighters don't have any cancer risk, any greater cancer risk than the general population. I don't think we're going to get to that point.
Steve, I hate to do it, but I agree with you, and I wish that we could say differently. But the reality of it is, every fire we go to, we're going to get exposed. If we're wearing our SVAs throughout the entire duration, we're not getting exposed through inhalation, but we're going to absorb this stuff into our skin. We know that now. The stuff can penetrate our gear, gets onto our skin, we absorb it. Right. I mean, that science is out there. We're not going to be able to avoid it. I think the other big thing is shift work. Just working our shifts, working at night. Whenever we interrupt our circadian rhythm, I mean, that's a carcinogen.
Right.
Just working at night. We're up against that too. That's our body's opportunity to heal. And if we're sleep deprived, like I was last night riding medic, and I feel today, we're not going to be able to heal properly. And especially if we're chronically being sleep deprived, and we're up all the time. So there's some things we're just not going to be able to avoid. We're going to have that risk, but there are just a plethora of initiatives that we can all actually do to reduce our risk. So there's no prevention, but there certainly is opportunity to try to reduce that risk.
Right.
But there are so many factors. I always kind of lay it like this. I'll put this out there. If we're at a fire, you and I are at a fire, and you and I put up a ladder, and I start climbing up the ladder, and I fall and I slip and I break my ankle. It's very obvious. Everybody knows when and how and where I broke my ankle. When you get cancer, you just don't know. Was it from this fire? Was it from that fire? Was it from the shift work? Was it from the diesel exhaust system? Was it whatever? You just don't know, because a lot of times too, that latency period that we have, where the 10, 15, 20, 25 years it takes for our cancer to show up, again, you have no idea. So because of that, it's imperative that we just do everything we possibly can to reduce our risk. Do everything, and just hope
pray, right,
that we don't get cancer, and if we do get cancer, that we catch it early. Yes, exactly. But the odds just aren't in our favor, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, as you just said, it's a matter of probably the most important thing we can do in the firehouse for everything that we do as firefighters is education. But instead of talking about how to extinguish this, how to force that door, how to set up this trench rescue, we got to teach in the firehouse about our cancer danger.
We talk about everybody goes home.
Yep.
When we start that day, we want to make sure that when we leave that day, we're all there, we're all safe, we're all healthy. but we haven't really incorporated that mindset of not only do we want to be there, but we need to make sure that our actions during that day allow us to be there 20, 30 years from now, allow us to be there for retirement, allow us to be there for our grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
What's the point of, I know in my state, I need to do 25 years. So I'm, going to work 25 years to retire. And what is the point of getting there just so I can get sick and die a couple years later?
Yeah.
Doesn't make sense to me. And I know there's things I did early on in which naive, nobody again taught me. And looking back, I definitely feel like an idiot. So who knows how short my life is going to be cut? I don't know.
Yeah, but you can't feel that way either, because back then you didn't know, we didn't know, none of us knew, really.
But the point is, though, these new kids, they know now, and it's also up to us. It's up to me and you and everybody else who has a microphone or a stage to talk. I know I get to talk to my recruits about all this stuff. We need to instill it then from the very start, how significant this all is, and to make sure that we're, they know, and that hopefully they make better decisions than we did, because at least they were educated.
Right.
We weren't.
Yeah, good point. Good point. All right. I think this will be a great place for break, folks. And when we come back, we're going to talk about Jim's personal journey down this very bumpy road. If you're watching the video, you won't see anything different. If you're listening to the audio, we're going to be back just after these few words. As always, please stay tuned. And we're back with this episode of 5 Alarm Task Force and my guest, firefighter paramedic Jim Burneka. Jim has over 20 years on the job. He is with local union 1. What was it? What was the number?
136.
136. I knew it was 130 something. 136. And we've been talking about one of the most important topics in the fire service today, and that is the Firefighter Cancer Initiative. Jim, through somebody in his department, the child of someone in his department, mentioned in the first segment that he got involved with the concept of this because that child had been stricken with cancer, and subsequently he discovered the Cancer Support Network and Mike Dubron out in the LA area, and he's been on board for nearly 15 years with this information. Me, I'm a newcomer. I started in 2016 when the podcast started, but I've done my best to learn as much as I could. And in this segment, we're going to get a little personal because Jim had his own diagnosis this year. I am pending another diagnosis, so I'm waiting to hear what is found with me. So Jim, why don't let's go to that personal story. And by the way, where it's too difficult and anything like that, just back off. That's fine.
No, that's okay.
I don't want to pry.
No, I do real quick. I should say I want to touch on Gavin real quick because I should have went this in the first segment. He's doing great.
Oh, wonderful.
He's old now. For me, he's old. He's not a 5-year-old anymore, but he's going to college, going to Ohio State, and he actually wants to do research on pediatric cancer. So he's trying to pay this forward from all of his experience. So he's
great.
He's an awesome kid.
So from all of us, we say hello and congratulations.
I will.
And we wish him all the best in that future.
So I guess going to me, this really goes back to spring of 2020, and just sitting across the dinner table from my wife, and she said, hey, you've got your right side of your neck looks larger than your left. And I know I got kind of the mic in front of me, but I couldn't tell. And I told her she was crazy. And she said, go look in the mirror. I looked in the mirror. I have a big neck. I don't see any difference though. And she kind of just gave me that look, and I just, all right, I'll get it checked out. And I've had that attitude of, well, just kind of listening to her, especially when it comes to stuff like this. But um, for a long time, or still today, I talk about my friend Mark Ryan, who was a Columbus firefighter and had a spot on his lower back, and he couldn't really see it. His wife tried to get him to go to the dermatologist, and he blew her off, and pushed it down the road. And finally, he said, "Make the appointment. I'll go to it." And she makes an appointment. He goes into the Ohio State James Cancer Center, which is ironically where I ended up and had my surgery. But they take a look at his back, and or excuse me, I went a little bit too far. He went to a dermatologist, and she ended up sending him to the James right then and there. Said, "You've got an appointment right now." And they did a biopsy, and sure enough, stage 4 melanoma. And so, given 4 years to live, and this is a guy, 35 years old, 5 kids. I've talked about that, and I've told that story so many times that when it came to my wife also kind of pestering me about this stuff, I just kind of knew in my head, better safe than sorry. I'll go ahead and get checked out. I think if I didn't know Mark's story and I didn't always preach it, I more than likely would have just blown her off as well. But I didn't. And I guess that's one of the good things. And one of the points of this story is if you're not feeling well or somebody points something out, just get it checked out. And if everything's okay, then good. But what if it's not? So I ended up getting an ultrasound, and sure enough, I had a nodule on my thyroid. They said it was still pretty small, and they weren't concerned about it right then, but they said, come back in a year or two. And so I came back that very next year. I didn't wait 2 years. My year's up. I'm going back in, and that nodule had grown, and it was about twice the size that it was a year ago. And so, I hit the phone lines, and I was able the very next day to get a biopsy done. And my wife and I went into that, and I think this is kind of unique compared to a lot of other individuals that get diagnosed. A lot of times you get a biopsy and you're waiting for a week to get those results. And I have to imagine it's just a horrible week, just the what if, the anticipation. Am I good? Am I not good? I didn't have that, Steve. I got pretty lucky. I waited about 5 minutes. This doctor was able to do the biopsy, put on some slides, look it under the microscope, and he came back. I got the paper upstairs, but he came back with a piece of paper that said papillary thyroid carcinoma, most common thyroid cancer, least aggressive, will require surgery. So that's how he broke the news to my wife and I. Just that piece of paper, and just talking. And I think I was still feeling optimistic until I actually was handed that sheet. I kind of thought that, yeah, I got a nodule, but it's not going to amount to anything. And I was wrong. And so it was, and I think everybody, I'm sure, has somewhat of a similar reaction. Well, I don't even want to speak for everybody. I could tell you that I thought that in my head going into this, I had the feeling of if this is cancer, I'll know what to do. I'll know who to call. I'll be okay. And where I feel like I did know that, and I did know who to call, and I was prepared in that fashion, I still realized after the fact that I wasn't prepared. That mentally, there's no way to prepare you for when you hear those words. There's just no practice. There's nothing you can do. You just have to deal with it. And I know after I got those words, my wife and I drove separate there, and she went and picked up my boys, who were 4 and 7 at the time, from my parents' house. I just wanted to drive home. I wanted to be home where I guess I just felt safe. And, uh, I remember the conversation even outside the building, the doctor's building. And I asked her to tell my mother and my father. And because I didn't think I could, and I didn't want to. It was only, I don't even think it was a 10-minute drive home, but it was a lot of thoughts going in my head then. It's just because the unknown. And looking back, I had surgery. I'm doing well. But at that time, I just didn't know really what it meant. I didn't know the extent. I didn't know the surgery. I didn't really know, what kind of treatments am I going to do? It was just the unknown. And that's when I had my, what happens from here? The mortality kind of thoughts, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, that was rough. Because there's no true book of how do you tell a 7-year-old? How do you tell your loved ones? And in reality, I didn't tell a lot of people by my voice, because there was times when, Steve, I couldn't even fathom the words. I knew what to say, but I couldn't physically say them.
Yeah.
Because I knew once I said those, they're hurtful words. It's saying something really bad to somebody, calling them names, but it's not, but it's
I know.
Whatever you say is going to be just venomous, and it's going to hurt them. I was already hurt, and all of a sudden, I knew when I said that they were going to be hurt too.
Mm-hmm.
That sucked. So there were oftentimes multiple occasions with people that were really close to me that my wife had to talk and say it.
I understand. My wife in 2010 was diagnosed with melanoma, stage 2 point. Never heard points before, but okay. And she went to the dermatologist. The kids, they had come home from the beach, and one of my daughters saw on my wife's back this spot, and my wife just kind of blew it off. And my daughter came to me, and she says, she received visiting, and she said, "I think you better take a look at mom, at her back." So I did. And she goes, "What do you think it is?" I said, "It's an appointment with the dermatologist. So what are you doing? Because you're going to go to the dermatologist." "Well, what?" She says, "You're going, whether I got to drag you or you can go on your own, but you're going to go see the dermatologist. So you're going to call Monday and go." And she did. And we had the biopsy, and we had to wait 3 days for the results. But they said, "You have to come back in, and we have to do a deeper biopsy." And they did. And then that was just a day and a half, and came back and said, "Yeah, you have melanoma. We're referring you to this surgeon who specializes in female melanoma." And he looked at the results, and it's the same thing. We had to go back, and even though one of our younger daughter of the two, and they're both grown women then, but how do you call them back and say, "You were right, mom, good thing you spotted that, because mom has melanoma"? How do you tell that to your daughter? She's 20 something years old, but that doesn't mean you don't still think of her as the little 5-year-old girl. And our older daughter, how do you tell them something like that?
Yeah.
I know exactly what you're feeling. As a matter of fact, what was funny was that the only humor that came out of it was that the surgery, even though it was just a small, very close, small spot, the surgery created a 13-inch scar that looks like a snake almost, or almost like a dragon. And my wife, since we're Jewish, and at our group our age group were not into ink a lot. And then my wife said, "Oh, that might be a good place for a tattoo when it all heals up and everything like that. I could have a dragon tattoo on my shoulder." I said, "The hell you will. You're gonna, you're okay, thank God." And she didn't need chemo. She didn't need any other surgery or any other treatment. But those few weeks were like sleeping and walking on nails. You were afraid one wrong movement and your whole world would come down. And same thing. How do you tell other members of the family? Should we tell other members of the family? Who do you share it with? It's a tough call. It really is.
I think the irony of the guy that's been preaching about this for a long time and then gets cancer. That was weird. The cancer guy gets cancer, but I used kind of my platform, getting on this mic, and I went from interviewing people like you're interviewing me. I was just interviewing people to where it became like a blog, a live.
This is my story.
Yeah, and
I've listened.
So there's probably, I don't know how many I did, 4, 5, 6, 7 episodes of just updates. It was my way of just keeping everybody up to date with what was going on, my journey, like you said. And I even think that having different times, I had different thoughts, I was different places here and there where I was, there was a point in time in which I'm going to fight this. I'm going to be fine, and it's going to work out. And, I'm, super positive. And then there's times when I'm angry because I know, a workers' comp fight is going to be coming and they're going to challenge me, which of course they are. And
does Ohio have a presumption law?
Yeah. They do.
They do. Okay.
Yes. But the cities can still have an opportunity to rebut it. And that's what they do for us Dayton firefighters, is they challenge every single one of us. So, I was, again, having seen this and having experience with other people dealing with this and helping them out. I didn't put in my workers' comp until I was back to work. So there was no, I was able to get through my treatments and procedures and everything else just fine. And it wasn't until after the fact, when everything was done. So it wouldn't get in the way of anything. It wouldn't.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Cause any delays. It wouldn't do, anything like that. So I was, I had people before me that have done that to where I was smarter and prepared, at least that way, with things. So that was good, having that. But I put it out there, and I was pretty vulnerable, and with the hope of also maybe helping people who were diagnosed as well to know that they don't feel the same. They may feel the same way, as they're not unique and how they feel. I talk about depression. I got depressed. Gained about 40 pounds from, before the surgery to after. I'm finally now just getting close to getting back to where I was, which I still need to go beyond that, by the way. But, that's just something that nobody really talked about before. So, I made a lot of notes going through this as well, because in my head, I instantly knew, like, I'm going to document this, not only through, the microphone, but also I want to put this down on paper so other people can use this as a resource. So I've got an article that should be coming out, I think, in December as part of a supplement in Firehouse magazine, just regarding being diagnosed and what to do, when to do it, just the ins and outs of everything. Kind of just a playbook, a guide. So that should be available here in just a few months.
That's sharing and teaching.
Yes.
That's the most important thing we can do.
Yes.
That's what you're doing. You're going out on that limb and doing it.
and I'm here. I take a pill a day, a thyroid supplement. I get ultrasound every 6 months, but other than that, I'm fine. I've got a cool little scar that you can barely see because they put in one of my fat folds of my neck, which I think they had opportunity. They had choices, which one to pick. But no, I'm still here. So why not use this experience to talk to other people about it? Before I had this, again, I've been teaching all over the place, and I always had to have somebody else that went through cancer, or I would play. A lot of times, I would play the Boston video with the wall,
Yeah.
just to try to make it kind of big picture, personal, and I played that video. I mean, I'm not exaggerating if I tell you 150 times, and I mean I know it by heart, and but I don't have to play that anymore. Now I just talk,
Right.
and it's still fresh, as you can tell. I still have moments, but I think that it actually, I mean, by doing that, by being vulnerable, by opening up, by putting yourself out there, all of a sudden I grab everybody's attention, and they listen to what I'm about to say, and teach them. And I just hope that they actually do some of the things I talk about. It's my hope.
That's all we can do.
Yeah.
We can, whether we're teaching how to put an SCBA on, how to make entry, how to use a tick, we can only teach and have them practice. Whether they're going to follow through and use what they've learned, that's not up to us. That's up to them.
That whole leading the horse to water, right?
Yeah. But as long as there are people like you and me and hundreds of others who, if not more, in the fire service who are willing to be out there and share knowledge, share experience, and teach others. And the first thing you have to teach them is being willing to share as well. We have to keep this sharing of knowledge for everything from basic tactics to personal health. We have to teach that to every new recruit class, every new generation that comes in. I don't care what the label is on generations. I think it's ridiculous already, but we just need to share the knowledge because we are a unique group. No matter what country you go to, firefighters are unique. We're a different breed from everybody else. We do the crazy crap that other people would never even think about. We shield other people from seeing what we see because we're saying, we'll take it, we'll absorb it, we'll deal with it. We don't want you to have to see that.
Yeah. I actually have the opportunity to have a whole morning with our recruits now, and I cover 3 different subjects. So firefighter cancer was one of them. And I think out of that, the important thing that I really talk about is I paint this picture of what they're up against. But I also talk about how the very first day they're out on the street, and I mean the very first day, there's a decent chance that they're going to catch a fire. And they're going to be in there doing an overhaul. And they're going to look around, and there's probably a good amount of firefighters that are on their crew and other crews that aren't going to be wearing their mask. And they're going to be given the opportunity right then and there to make a choice. Am I going to do what they're doing, or am I going to do what's right for me and my family in the long run? And that's the very first day they can have that opportunity to make that choice. And still, all too often, they give into that peer pressure of it's my new crew. I want to do what they do. I don't want to go against the grain. And they take that mask off. And it is frustrating to see, but I'm trying. Again, they know. And I try to put it in real life perspective of what it's going to be like when they get out there. And then the other 2 classes I talked about, which are important as well, as the other one is just behavioral health, and talk about our peer support program and
Right.
what we do. And that's nothing that was ever discussed back then. And then the last one the last one is I think we don't really talk about it, but it makes a lot of sense, especially when it comes to just our wellness overall, is financial planning. So from the very start, when these kids are starting to talk about all the different options and to talk about their pension and talk about, um, everything that's involved, and whether it's deferred comp or Roths or 401ks and everything that we deal with, supplemental cancer insurance, life insurance, just
Disability insurance.
yes. I mean, having to have an honest conversation, not selling them stuff. That's
Right.
not what I'm doing, but to let them know, to talk about credit cards and how bad they are, and loans and living within your means. Um, all talking about that from the start hopefully will encourage them to make some wise decisions earlier on. Decisions, better decisions than probably I made when I started, when I was 21 years old, and all of a sudden I've got a good job, and you know, I'm traveling to LA to see the Dodgers or whatever,
Right. Right.
But, if you're able to be in a better financial position, you won't have that stress, and you won't have to be dependent on this job. For us in Ohio, and I know it's similar elsewhere too, for me, I've got to do 25 years and I got to be 48 to retire and start getting my pension. These new kids still have to do 25 years, but they can't retire until they're 52. And then even after that, whether it's me or them, you have a opportunity for the drop program. So you can do that double dip kind of
Right.
pension. And too often, I think there are firefighters that are dependent on that. Like, they make decisions based on them doing 8 years in the drop of and having $400,000 or $500,000 in the bank when they leave, and they get hurt or they get sick, and then they're just, what do I do? And my attitude is, if you want to do the drop, that's fine, but you shouldn't have to feel like you have to do it. If you should be in a good place ahead of time,
Right.
and have stuff paid off. And if you want to do that, then that's fine, but you shouldn't have to be dependent on it. So having that conversation early on with these kids too, I think is going to be helpful to them. And all three of those were never conversations that came up in my class or your class, or up until recently, it wasn't even a thing to talk about that kind of stuff.
I fell into disability insurance. I was 24 years old. I was making $25,000. And the guy came into my office at the synagogue and he says, you should have disability insurance. I said, disability insurance? That's people in wheelchairs or on those crutches and stuff. He goes, no, you could have an accident. So I said, all right, fine. So get me in. So I signed up for it. I was 24 years old. And as I moved to other positions in my profession, I was making more money each time I went to another synagogue, and increased my value in it. And it was September of 92, at the age of 40, that I wound up becoming disabled. Now, I was disabled out of the fire service due to a knee injury, but that was the fire service after 8 years. And I could understand that. I had already had 2 surgeries on that knee, and they didn't want to take a chance. So I headed up their video. I set up a video crew for them and became an inspector. But in 1992, at the age of 40, I woke up with a backache that turned out to be a severely herniated disc. I hadn't moved anything, hadn't lifted anything. And the surgeon said, because you can't go back to doing what you were doing. He goes, you're medically disabled. You can't do that. I can't have you sitting in chairs and that period of time and doing that kind of work. So I remembered that I had this disability policy. So I called up my local guy. He came out, did the interview, gave me the paperwork, filled it out. And thank God, since 92, when I could only work maybe part-time for 4 hours a day, something like that, in different types of jobs. Luckily, I finally got a decent job in medical with my own personal doctor, and I became the administrator and the triage director for his primary care practice for 12 years. But without that disability, we would have been in a real tough pickle, but it was paying me, my investment back. And it continues today, not the same amount because I passed 65, but I still get some on a monthly. But at 24, I said, who the hell needs disability? Well, you know what? You're going into this business,
Yeah.
buy into a private disability policy if you can afford it.
Kind of, if I may piggyback on that, Steve, again, I knew the odds weren't always going to be good for me. So there's firefighter cancer supplemental insurance out there. There's different policies, different groups. I ended up getting 2 of them, and it certainly helped this time around when I was diagnosed. And again, I had insurance, I had sick time, so I really was taken care of in that aspect. But if somebody who is a volunteer part-time or whatever their situation may be, maybe they don't have insurance, or maybe their insurance isn't very well, I could see how that firefighter cancer supplemental insurance could be beneficial to them in that time period. So it's something to look into as if you're a firefighter, just because, again, I know I've already said it a couple of times, but the odds aren't really for us. So having something that may help with that and get you through financially, so you don't have to even worry about it. Because when you do get diagnosed, and I know you're going to agree with me on this, is really your whole focus should be on winning, on beating it, on coming out on top, and just that should be your focus. And you shouldn't have to worry about the bills. You shouldn't have to worry about workers' comp stuff. I mean, you should just worry about beating your cancer and being around. And I was able to, really concentrate on that.
That's great. That's great. And it's great advice as well. It was a tough road. And it is a tough road for every one of our brothers and sisters when they're diagnosed. But if we can teach the new ones coming in what to expect, because, until, like for you 15 years ago, even then it was Gavin, a 5-year-old child. It wasn't another firefighter, but he was a brother firefighter to you. But if we can teach our incoming firefighters those 3 classes that you teach, we can give them that kind of education when they're just starting out, before their first day on the job, when they're still in rookie school or still in the training academy, wherever they are. We're setting them up for better success than your generation or my generation would have ever had, because there's no better weapon than knowledge to fight with.
So not only are they aware of the situation, but they also have access to me. And I don't, when you're in rookie school, I guess it's depending on where you're at. It's a semi-military thing. It's sir and ma'am and all that kind of stuff. And I'm one of the few, I think, that go in there and just like, hey, I'm Jim. Relax. just chill. I'm going to talk to you as just Jim. I'm not firefighter, paramedic, or health. Let me just talk to you. And that usually, I think, helps too, because they can, if they have questions, concerns, I feel like I make myself more approachable that way too.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm not better than them. I'm not superior than them. I'm one of them. They're peer.
Absolutely. And again, you're a brother. That's what it is, or you're a sister. And that's what makes it relevant. You're not having some professor walk in or some doctor from a hospital 300 miles away coming in to telling you what to do. You're having one of your own coming in saying, this is what I learned. Oh, and by the way, this is what I went through. And I want to give you the knowledge and the means to know in advance what you might face, be prepared for it, as best as you can, financially maybe, but know that you have a support group. Should you ever need us, we're here. We're here for the behavioral health support. We're here for your medical support. If you need us to help you, we're here for it. We always see those good stories at the end of the newscasts. I think they should start the newscasts off with those stories. When we see a child going home after cancer, we see a firefighter going home after a bout of cancer or severe injury. Those should be the lead stories. I don't want to see the plane crashes. I don't want to see the bank robberies. I want to see the good story to show that there are good things that happen and good people out there.
I just don't even watch the news, Steve. I just don't even. I give up. I don't want to know.
It's a good point today. It really is. It's a tough point today. Jim, I can't thank you enough. And by the way, folks, if you want to reach Jim, you can reach him on Twitter at Jim Burneka, Burneka, right? And that's
Correct.
The same thing on Instagram as well. Are you on Instagram?
I think so. I don't know what I'm doing on there, but I know I'm on there.
All right, he's there. And really, to tell your story, to share your story, your personal story, besides your pathway to this topic that you and I are so adamant and so supportive of, with the people that we know, that we're all involved in our big group, from not just the Firefighter Cancer Support Networks, not all of those, but even our PFOS groups, Diane and all her supporters and stuff like that. We're all part of this another family. And I guess that's just another outgrowth of the fire service, is that we always see something as family, because that's what we are. And we can be strangers from across the world or across the country. But once we talk about an issue in the fire service, we're just one family. And hopefully this message from today is going to get out there to our viewers, our listeners, your listeners as well. And it's going to bring, I've been a teacher for over 50 years, and I'm hoping it's going to bring just a little bit more education to some of the listeners who may not have either heard this before, or maybe didn't pay attention to it when they heard it, because they said, hey, it's me. I don't have to worry about that stuff. You know what? We do. You're in this job. It's as much as you may be afraid of falling through a floor into a basement and you're not expecting it, you're not going to expect necessarily a diagnosis either. But we do. And then we have to do what we can to get over that hump, just like we do with anything else, because that's who we are and that's what we do. We don't give in to challenges. It's our very last effort will be put forth to beat that challenge. Jim, great story. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. This was probably one of the best podcasts I've done in over 5 years. And I thank you.
Wow. That says an awful lot, Steve. Thank you for having me on here. I made it a 6-alarm podcast. You made it a 6-alarm podcast. That's right. That's right. And I hope you'll come back. I always say, once you're a guest on the show, you have an open invitation. So whenever you want to come back, you're welcome. Just shoot me an email and say, hey, something happened. I want to talk to you about this. We'll get you on the air. Perfect. As long as I'm okay to do it myself. All right. Well, again, my thanks to Jim Burneka Jr. for joining us with a great story about his fire experience, fire paramedic experience, how early he learned about firefighter cancer, and how not only has he joined the battle for all other firefighters, but how he went through his own battle and has come out for it. Thank God, healthier and better than he was that day that he was diagnosed. And we hope it just continues that way for you, Jim. That's all we can pray for. Is that good? Folks, if you're watching the video, this will be the end of the program. If you're listening to the audio, as you know, we're going to be back right after a few words. So please stay tuned. For the rest of you, thank you for tuning in. We look forward to seeing you next week. Take care. Bye-bye, everybody.